it, and the subject is trams and light rail. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how you can eat mince pies through Teams, but we'll find a way. Okay, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening, albeit a week earlier than planned, thanks to, I can't remember if it's ASLEF or the RMT or both, or even all three. So, Trams and light rail, Paul asked me to come and talk to you because he was a victim of one of my presentations to, I think, the Future Transport London. Thought maybe I should say a few things about me. I'm not an engineer. That's always the first thing to get across to an august body like the PWI. But I have annoyed lots of engineers by making unreasonable demands of them, particularly when I was in charge of accessibility issues at London Transport, later TfL, and of course many engineering colleagues I came across in London Underground who did superb things to get what I wanted, like humps on platforms, which are like a rash now. They're almost everywhere. I began my career in transport with BR back in the 60s. I joined as a estate and rating surveyor trainee. Not long after, if you were old enough to remember the 1960s, government was persuading businesses to move out of London to reduce congestion, demands on space, housing, traffic, all kinds of stuff. So the railways, being state-owned, were instructed to move. The Midland went to Crewe, the Eastern went to York, the Southern did their best to Beckenham, Croydon and Wimbledon. And on the Western, still known as the Great Western, of course, it was Bristol, Plymouth, inevitably Swindon, lots of interesting places. But in the end, we were told we were going to Slough. And I had a bit of difficulty with Slough. A, I'd already been there, and it's not somewhere you necessarily go twice. B, of course, it meant I'd have to be on the 8:24 from Paddington or end up in the late book, which was never good news when you were only 17. So somebody in the office said, well, why don't you ring London Transport? They do a similar scheme. And I rang LT, and lo and behold, within a week, I'd transferred. And I went to the Chief Estate and Rating Surveyor's office at Chiltern Court, Baker Street. Had lots of fun there because in that period, we were completing the Victoria Line and starting to build the Brixton extension. And I was the new boy sent off to Brixton to all sorts of negotiations with local residents and other parties in and around Somerleyton Road, if you know, where we were building the escalator shaft for the new Brixton station. I smoked, I've no idea how many different potions. I drank no idea what quantity of probably 120% proof alcohol, but in the end, we got the deal we needed and cleared some houses for the shafts. Not long after that, within certainly 3 years of joining LT, I moved out of London. I had then met the love of my life. We've been together for 54 years, married for 52. She's a country girl. She's from just outside Bath. And I thought, well, I don't think she'll take to London very well, but happily, I know that area because I grew up in the West Country. Though born in North London, I ended up in school in Wells. And she's from just south of Bath. So I just wrote a letter to the bus company in Bristol. And in bus speak, in that period, people from London Transport were seen as a good thing. That wasn't always the case some years later, but certainly in the 60s. So Bristol were quite keen to get somebody to join them from LT. They hadn't a clue what they were going to do with me. And in the end, I kicked off with a guy who's been Chief Schedules Officer for City Services in Bristol since the days of the Trams in 1938. And what Harry didn't know about the way buses work in Bristol wasn't worth knowing. So he and I were put together to kind of look at how you could recast the whole network and make it work better. So it was quite an interesting challenge. From that, I went on to do various things in the Bristol company. It became part of the National Bus Company in 69 when that all came around. I ended up as the local manager for the company in Swindon, one of the best jobs I had, because I was 48.7 miles from head office, further than anyone else. So it was kind of UDI every other day. From there, I went to London Country Bus Services, which was almost like going back to London Transport, if you know the history. LT was split in 1970, with the GLC taking over red buses in the Underground and the green buses and Green Line coaches crisscrossing London. Went to be a new subsidiary of NBC. And I got there 6 years after that, in 76, to be area manager of the southern half of the Polar Mint. We always called it a Polar Mint because the middle bit was obviously still LT, and we had this ring around that we did cross central London with Green Line coaches, despite the traffic. 79, I became ops manager for the whole Mint, and then somebody decided I should go elsewhere, and I went to Alder Valley, based at Aldershot. This was another slightly strange creation of National Bus Company. There'd been a bus company called Aldershot District, and another one called Thames Valley, based in Reading, and they put the two together, even though they came from different constituent parts. One was a tilling company, and the other was BET, like chalk and cheese. Fascinating experience too, because it was hemorrhaging money all over the place. So quite a challenge to get it working better. That went into privatisation, and I became the MD of the northern half of what had been Alder Valley. We bravely renamed it the B-Line to give it a bright new image. Buses were yellow. One of the great stories to tell of that period was that we found after 18 months that our insurance premium had almost halved. We couldn't understand why this was. So we went to see the insurance company. They said, yeah, it's because your buses are now all yellow, and that's much safer. Red buses apparently are sort of an aggressive sign for people to drive their beaten up Minis and A40s into, but not yellow. So the premium fell, which is quite good news. I came back to London Transport in 1991 as a bit of a specialist. By then, we'd done various things in bus companies I'd been running up to then to try and make things easier for people who use wheelchairs, for mums with kids and buggies, which is amazing really when you think that more than half of the population of bus users in Britain since the 1950s has been female, and probably half of that half, maybe slightly more than half of that half, are travelling with shopping and kids. And yet we always presented them with a bus with great big steps, hence low floor, and that's the kind of thing I was pioneering in the 90s. LT, of course, became TfL. There were a whole series of changes in the structure of the organisation, and I took the chance to go with a bag full of fibres at almost at the end of 2003, and set up myself as an independent consultant under the name of BAC. I did quite a bit of work for the EU, especially in the new accession countries coming from the communist bloc, as an expert advising on how they could get EU money for their modern tram proposals, etc., etc. I still do odd bits of consultancy, but I'm 74 now, so I'm not actively looking for work. If somebody rings me up and says, Andrew, would you like to go to Sarajevo? Well, why not? It's a nice place. Balkan, on the other hand, I'm not sure. So I also did a short period as interim DG of UK Tram, the UK representative body for the tram and light rail companies. And I've been a council member of the LRTA, Light Rail Transit Association, vice president these days, for some years. I've been a lifelong and some would say passionate advocate of electric public transport, trams and trolleybuses, both of which we should not have thrown away in the 50s and 60s, but we did. And I'm also a passionate European. So if anyone here voted to leave the EU, please see me afterwards. So this was the snazzy logo that somebody designed for me for the consultancy business, and that's the logo of the LRTA. So what can trams do? Well, they can actually do lots of things. And chief among them is that they can improve life in so many different ways. They can regenerate local economies. They can create more jobs. They can actually give you probably the best opportunity you'll ever have to remodel your city, as we'll see shortly, was done in many, many French cities. The most important thing that I think is that any form of fixed public transport, be it heavy rail, light rail, tram, will give people confidence. Now, I've run thousands of buses on millions of miles in different parts of the UK, but a bus is never going to encourage people to put money into a city because it's here today, gone tomorrow. You can easily remove it. It is bound to be stuck with the rest of the traffic unless you give it its own priority, which then becomes very controversial. Motorists don't like bus lanes because they sit in a jam and they see a bus that's got some special way. Less of a problem with a tram because they realise there's some rails there, and if they're sitting on those, they might get into trouble. So the 20th century problem, as I like to call it, is that in this country, we gave up. on trams. And that was a mistake. Some other European countries didn't do that. The French kind of did what we did, but they still had 3 systems left that were rather better than Blackpool. And of course, the Austrians, Belgians, Dutch, Germans, and the Swiss basically retained their tramways and modernized them. One of the fascinating things about Germany is that about half of the 55 tramway systems that exist in Germany today were rescued by the British because they were in zones where the British Army was in control. The British Army realized they had overall responsibility for clearing the rubble from bombed cities. Hanover is a superb example. The British commander in Hanover said, this is easy. We've got these rails that the trams run on. We could run all kinds of adapted trucks on those and buy a few steam locomotives, clear all the rubbish from the streets, and then relay the roads and reinstate the trams. The British did that. They didn't do it at home, but they did it there, which is really interesting. As I say, France was much like the UK. There were 3 places that remained loyal to the tram. The best example, Saint-Étienne, a mining town south of Lyon, if anyone's been there. It would have been, in effect, impossible to provide the service they did on their one remaining tram line, the 4 with buses, because they'd have been nose to tail from the top end of the town to the other. Dead straight line connecting industry, mining in the southern part of the town, etc. So the 4 was retained because it was the best way to move people around. In Marseille, they retained 1 tram line because they dug a tunnel into the central station at Noailles, which obviously made sense. And in Lille, there'd been a big investment just after the First World War to create 2 boulevards with trams on them between Lille and the adjoining communes of Tourcoing and Roubaix. But everything else, like us, was gone. Now, it's really interesting that in the early 1980s, the French Transport Ministry, and I'd love this to have happened in the UK, but we always had just the Ministry of Roads. It didn't understand anything about public transport, largely still doesn't. But the French Minister of Transport rang up all the mayors that he knew and said, you've got a problem. It's called congestion. You need to relieve this congestion. You need to find a way of getting people out of their cars. You need better public transport. Come and see me. I've got some money. Everyone was terrified of this, the idea of having money from the Minister of Transport. But 1 or 2 knocked on his door, and then quite famously, Nantes in the Pays de Loire, Nantes became the first city to inaugurate a modern tramway. It was very controversial. Probably more than 50% of the population, when it was first announced, would have been against the idea. But they did a very good job with the PR and having excellent representatives to go into the communities of the city and explain what would happen, what the benefits would be, etc., etc. And it became an instant success once it was inaugurated. And then, of course, everybody really wanted to copy that. The second French city, I'm sorry, that's an example of one of the first modern trams in Nantes. And you can see this business of being able to regenerate, renew your areas and have fancy ideas like the tram comes through the roundabout. It has absolute priority, all the traffic stops, and you even have a fountain to make it look fancier still. So Grenoble, the second city, was the first to go for this very modern vision of step-free access so that people in wheelchairs could just roll on and off the tram. So they had the first genuine low-floor trams in the world back in 1987. They were a little bit windy about steps and gaps and would it really work? So actually at all the doorways of the trams, there were these pallets fitted, which automatically extended once the tram had stopped, linked to the opening of the doors and retracted with the closing of the doors. Bit tacky, liable to give you some difficulty, as any add-on stuff like that does, but in reality, they quickly realized you don't need that. Because if you've got all the design criteria right, straight platforms, avoid curved platforms like the plague, you can physically achieve a less than 25mm gap, both horizontally and vertically. Of course, it varies with rail and wheel wear, but not by enough to create a major problem. So that really was the winning way. How did all this happen? Well, the French, at the time the Transport Ministry started offering money for these schemes, they made it clear that cities had to create a plan. They had to say how they were going to deal with urban mobility and, in brackets, whispered, suppress use of cars. So we had this wonderful plan de déplacement urbain, which was a government legal requirement before you could have any money of any kind to do anything. Once you'd got through that process and approvals and release of monies, both locally and nationally, and we'll come back to that, you would produce a DUP, Déclaration d'Utilité Publique. This would effectively give the city concerned all the necessary powers and all the legal protections from having built their tramway. So if there was a need compulsorily to acquire land, then this would be part of the DUP process. So the French use the phrase TCSP, transport en commune sur site propre, on a reserved way. In a small number of cases, there have been busways built to this process, smaller cities. Metz is one, for example, and Nantes, although it has 3 lines of tramway and is building at least 1 more, possibly 2, they have a busway built under this same approval procedure. But it is about having something on its own right of way, because the ministry's belief, quite spectacularly, was that you can't just run these things in mixed traffic. They're not going to work as effectively. You might have a few short sections, as we do, for example, in Croydon, where trams run along Lebanon Road in mixed traffic, but it's not enough to create a major problem of the kind that the first generation tramways, certainly in the UK, used to suffer. Some state subvention was always promised, but on a reducing scale in recent years. And the most spectacular thing to raise money is this versement transport. Very crudely, it's a payroll tax. So what it says is, if you're an employer within this, not just maybe the city boundary, but an enlarged transport region around the city, you would be obliged to pay, depending on the number of employees, a certain amount. Generally, that varies between about 2–2.5% when nothing is really being done, but it could be as high as 21% when construction is underway and plans are being made for a second or a third line, etc. Initially, as you might imagine, business was 1,001% opposed to this. Yeah, well, I think it's but it was pushed through. By the time, for example, in Nantes, and I went quite a lot to Nantes to sit in some of the meetings between the mayor and the transport team and local business, the situation was totally reversed. Once the first line had opened and been a success, business was saying, we want more of this. One of the reasons they wanted more of it was that some of the bigger employers had very large car parks and they found they could close them. Once the trams were running, people gave up driving. Far more convenient to take the tram. So they could release land otherwise sterilised for parking. So they were quite keen. Most importantly, mayors as key figures in all of this were responsible for getting business on side. There's an amusing story so far on side that in the case of Clermont-Ferrand, there is an unusual tramway on rubber tyres. Why is that? Because the largest employer in Clermont-Ferrand is Michelin. So the CEO of Michelin went to see the then mayor of Clermont, said, we're very interested in the tram project. It's a wonderful idea, but of course, it must run on rubber tyres provided by Michelin. A bit difficult. What do you do if you're the mayor? Well, there was a company called Trams who were trying to sell the idea of a rubber tyre tram. So the whole thing came together. It's had a few problems, it's fair to say. And the most amusing thing of all is that it no longer runs on Michelin tyres. Because there were special big tyres with quite big wheels to take the weight under the articulations of the vehicles. And after about 3 years, Michelin gave up making that size. So they now run on Bridgestone tyres in the Michelin city. So with this versement transport, as I say, maximum rolling around all over the place, but in larger centre population, it could vary to meet the need. The mayor is obviously the important person. I've never understood why we have this love-hate relationship with elected mayors in the UK. I used to work in Bristol, and recently there was a Bristol mayor elected for the city. Bit crazy, really. A bit like the Lord Mayor of London within Greater London. So eventually we woke up for London and had a proper mayor, Livingston, followed by Johnson, followed by Khan. It's the right thing to do. You have to have a figurehead, you have to have a leader who's going to kick ass and get things done. But amusingly, in Bristol, there was a referendum to decide on the future of this mayor, and after only 2 terms, 2 different mayors, they've scrapped the idea and they've gone back to cabinet government in Bristol City Council. But there is a mayor for WECA, West of England Combined Authority. Another strange name. Most of us regard the West of England as at least Devon, if not Cornwall. So somehow they've called it the West of England Combined Authority. But they don't have any real power. French mayors have significant powers, especially in terms of transport, and they are able to get things done. There is always, you remember the Mitterrand years, the Grand Projet of the Pompidou Centre, and so Pompidou, not Mitterrand, but Mitterrand was probably just as bad. So they do like big projects. Now, I would pick holes in quite a few of the French tramway projects as possibly overspending on completely rebuilding a city. You don't need to do that to make the tramway work. If you do, of course, it's going to cost a lot more money. So there are issues around that, but all credit to them, they've generally made it work. Most importantly, in all of this, is that you must have a fully integrated public transport network at the end of the game. The tram has to be part of that network. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the same operator, but you certainly can't have the crazy things we do in Britain with deregulated buses. If you go to Nottingham, there's a perfectly good tramway which should be carrying double the number of passengers. It isn't, because the buses are still allowed to compete with it. There's absolutely no sense in doing that at all. Public transport is a natural monopoly. It's better if it's a public monopoly, at least as in TfL, where the controls, fares, timetables, colour of bus, accessibility features, etc., are commanded by a public authority, but by all means go out to tender to get private companies to run the business. I would argue that London's bus system in the 1960s was dreadful because it was all one set of red buses, 8,500 of them, run by London Transport, brackets also known as the TGWU, and it didn't do very well. But once we grew up and got to the point of competitive tendering for services, under the control of LT and later TfL, so operators do as they're told, the private sector has actually done a better job than LT itself ever did. But integration, one ticket is vitally important. One of the key reasons people don't use public transport much in the UK is that it's too bloody complicated. Whereas if you've got a car, you only need one key to go in any direction, any time of the day or night. But the moment you introduce a system that says, you're going on a bus, well, you need a bus ticket. Oh, you're coming back in the evening. That's a different bus operator. You'll need a different ticket. Or you want to change from the bus to the train. You'll have to have a train ticket as well as a bus ticket. So people basically give up. One integrated system, one tariff for the whole lot. So once you bought the ticket, it's commonly valid for 90 minutes, changing as often as you want between different modes, and even bigger bargains for day tickets or 24-hour tickets or monthly tickets or annual tickets. And all across Europe now, the idea of a €1 a day fare is taking off quite rapidly. You may know that the Germans in the summer ran a promotion of €9 for the whole of the country. Incredible, €9 to go anywhere by public transport, but only on regional trains, not on the fast moving intercity or ICE trains. It was hugely popular, embarrassingly so. They're going to replace it in January with a €49 ticket, which effectively does the same thing. So they're targeting getting towards the €1 a day, which will be magic in terms of cost comparisons with car use. Back to Nantes. It's very, very important, as well as integrating tariff and timetable wise the trams and the buses, to do something to improve the buses. So alongside a shiny new tramway, Nantes introduced gas-powered buses for the first time. And they actually found that in overall terms, they'd increased public transport use by about 68%. And within that, they'd increased bus use by 23%. No one would have believed you'd get more people on buses, but they did. The great thing about developing a modern tramway is that inevitably in a city you will have some vision for future housing. And that's worked extremely well in places like Nantes, where you actually build the tram line before any of the houses are occupied. So as people move in, they've got tram every 4 minutes into the city. Why do they want a car? Very simple. We should be doing that, but of course we're not. Where I live, North East Hampshire, there are thousands and thousands of houses being built on former military land. And you can reckon that if there's 2,500 houses, there'll be at least 3,000 cars. And we will worsen the congestion to the point where everybody just sits in the same queue all day long, between somewhere on the edge of Fleet and somewhere on the edge of Aldershot. Bonkers. The other great thing about a modern tramway is the way in which you can integrate it into older cities. This is the centre of Grenoble. And it looks as though those trams have been there hundreds of years. And in fact, the first generation tramway in Grenoble that closed in the 1950s didn't go down this street. So it's not even reinventing the wheel, but it looks a natural fit. And of course, they're perfect for integrating with pedestrian areas. Buses not only are issuing sometimes black diesel smoke and particulate emissions from tyres and brake wear, but they're also unpredictable in the way that they move, whereas a set of rails is obvious that people see how they're going to move. Public transport is most successful when it's very obvious and dominates. If we hide things away underground, and I'll come back to that, it doesn't dominate. If it dominates, it will be still greater a success. And that's what's happened in most French cities. The vehicles are big, but it doesn't matter because they're there, they're naturally accepted by people, and they're hugely popular. You can also, of course, create grand works of art, completely impractical as a shelter from either wind or rain. But this is the centre of Strasbourg, the main city stop called Homme de Fer. And I could take you through probably 20, even 30 UK urban transport plans, which on the front cover have that picture. You know, that's what they want in wherever it may be. But it's just a work of art. It's a statement, not really a practical shelter from wind or rain. Tracks in grass. This is something engineers initially were resistant to, but they later accepted it and caught on. One of the reasons is that track bedded in grass lasts longer than fixed in concrete, etc., or even ballasted track like heavy rail. It also gives you this kind of green wave argument. No, this is the future. This is environmentally friendly. Tracks in green grass. Excellent. Controversial though it was, the city of Strasbourg, in fact, the mayor, Catherine Trautmann, elected in 1990, said that by 1994 she would open a tramway and clear cars out of the centre of Strasbourg. And all her political colleagues and indeed her rivals said, "You're mad, you'll never get elected." But she was. And she was elected for 4 terms. And in each term, she introduced another tram line. Hugely popular. But this was the main north-south street in Strasbourg. And everybody said, "Catherine, you can't, where are you going to put the cars if you take them away?" She said, "I don't care. I'm going to take them away. These are problems for other people to solve." And of course they did. And also, interestingly, we found that when congestion charging was introduced in London, about a third of the daily car traffic through central London disappeared. And it didn't noticeably go anywhere else. So you've kind of got this phenomenon that people drive into central London because they can. They don't need to. They're willing to pay the astronomical rates of parking, whatever. But you can actually, just as you can say, if you build the M25, you're bound to get more traffic. What happens if you close the M25? Maybe that's a bit controversial, but if you close certain city streets, the traffic will literally just melt away. It takes brave steps to do it, but that's what happened. Interchange, you're clearly not going to have tram routes that go absolutely everywhere in a city, whatever its size. There will be some need to change mode. Don't be embarrassed about that, but make it work. Make sure it's undercover, make sure it's cross-platform. In this example, the bus you can see on the left is pulling in on one side of the stop platform and the tram going in the other direction is on the other side of it. So you literally step from one mode into the other on the same ticket. You don't really notice you're doing it. If you introduce barriers, it will not be a success. Back again to integration, if you know it, this is the historic quarter of Strasbourg, some wonderful old buildings and a canal just under the bridge here. And these two modern trams look the part. They don't disturb in the way that lots of smoky buses do. Bordeaux was another interesting example where former Prime Minister Alain Juppé, who of course knew where all the bodies were buried in the Élysée Palace, he managed to get 3 billion out of central government to build a 3-line tramway network. He successfully argued that he had to do all 3 at once. Some of us might challenge that, but he won, no matter, and he did. But he also fell for this idea that you don't want overhead wires. We must have something else. So as you can see here, there's a third rail in the center of the running tracks and a system called APS, Alimentation par Sol. It's third rail, not quite as hairy as third rail Southern Electric in our thinking, but it's powered effectively only when the tram is moving over it. So as this tram moves down the street, at each section is powered and it collects current and it moves. Now, as you can imagine, when it's cold, and it can get cold in Bordeaux, and all that lot ices up, your conductivity is a problem. And I think it's pretty well known that electricity and water are not good bedfellows. So there were enormous struggles to get this to work. In the end, because they had to, Alstom, who invented it, which means, of course, he can only buy his trams from Alstom because it's a proprietary system of theirs, spent millions to get it to work. Having got it to work and rationalized everything, you can reckon that that's about section for section, it's about 3 times the construction cost compared to overhead wire, and it's 8 times the maintenance cost because you have to keep cleaning it, you have to keep replacing it, much more than you would wire. So why does he do this? Especially when this is the central terminal called Quinconce, all these lovely trees would have hidden the wires anyway. But no, he's still got his APS. It's a bit daft. By contrast, here is Orléans. The main street in Orléans, I challenge you to show where the tram wires are. In fact, they're strung from the buildings on either side of the street. There are no poles. If you go to Croydon, we've got ugly great H-section, 5th grade, 8th grade steel poles, and the overhead, you could run a TGV under it.
Croydon does a bit like that.
So, yeah, this is the better way to do it. Political bravery. This is a super example, one of the routes west out of the centre of Bordeaux, a street called Braddock, which was 4 lanes of traffic. So the 2 middle lanes are taken for the tramway and reserved for the tramway, only trams use that, and the other 2. And this is brilliant because it's the mission statement. The 2 outer lanes are always jammed, the 2 middle lanes are moving perfectly. And in the end, people use their brains and say, why am I sitting in this jam? I could be on the tram. But it needs bravery. Intriguingly, in the last 34 years, the French have done this 28 times. And in fact, they've done it more than 28 times because there are now 13 tramways in Paris. But that's only counts as 1 in my figure of 28. And they're working on 29 and 30, and 31, 2 and 3 are in the pipeline. And they're getting to smaller and smaller places, as we'll see in a moment. We've struggled to do anything like that. We've got, as you know, Manchester, Sheffield, Nottingham, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Croydon. They're all good in their own sweet ways, but they lack, I would say, ambition and drive. And we'll come back to that point in a little bit too. So we're not very good at these things. And currently, other than an extension being built in Edinburgh and a talking point about creating a new combined authority for Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, then the Nottingham tramway would probably extend to and grow in Derby. But it's not funded and it would be a long way off. One of the intriguing things about what the French have done, I was in Nice with my wife a year or so after the tram was inaugurated there, and I went to buy a postcard. and I could not find a postcard without a tram on it. Every single postcard in Nice somewhere has got a tram on it, large or small. So the municipal pride in these things, which again, the French are much better at than we are, is an important contributor. Lessons for the UK? Well, we've got to move away from this hugely centralised government that we have. It's the most centralised outside Bulgaria, and they're modernising. Gordon Brown's report the other day, I think, makes interesting reading. If you haven't, pick it up somewhere on the internet. He's right that we need to recognise that important decisions taken locally are far easier to get through the people process than big ones taken in Westminster. So we've really got to give real powers to mayors in these cities and stop having referendums to say, do you want a mayor? Sorry, there's no choice. You've got to have a mayor, because that's how your government's going to work at a local level. These real obligations to create plans to say how you're going to deal with urban mobility are a very important lesson. The wonderful Versement Transport we need to copy, and we need to understand a lot of the things we don't currently about how you operate under a franchise system or totally under the control of authority. You do not want competition between modes. That is bonkers. You've got to achieve every mode on one ticket. In essence, of course, we need to be more European and less American. Post-COVID, well, there's lots of interesting stuff, isn't there? The railways are terrified because they've lost lots and lots of commuters who are now working from home. Will they always work from home? I predict over a 3-ish, maximum 5-ish year timescale, working from home will virtually disappear. There will be some, for very good reasons, but the huge quantity there is now, and it's really fascinating that a lot of this is public sector. I go to meetings in Nottingham because I'm one of the 3-man team that reviews penalty affair appeals for the tram in Nottingham. And we go occasionally to meet at the City Council's offices. And it's absolutely dramatic. There are hundreds of empty desks. People are working from home. I mean, why is this allowed? The only thing I agree with Rees-Mogg on is that you should get the civil service back to the bloody office. End of. It's also a very, very bad thing. I would contend all the jobs I've done in over 50 years in public transport, I couldn't have done from home. No way. I did work from home for 6 months, no choice, after I had prostate cancer and got it removed, and I had 6 months recuperation, so I had to work from home. I hated it. I work from home now, but that's because I'm in a different environment. But I learned so much from other people by being in offices, going to meetings. How do you develop people and develop their careers if they're sitting at home on a terminal? And for most of them, the awful thing is going to be, look what Musk has done with Twitter. You know, they're all working from home, so he just sacks them all. He doesn't even need to see them. And that's what will happen. Where's blinking stop? Well, he works from home, sir. Oh, we don't need him then. Right, blinking stop. We'll get rid of him. So I think we will see those things changing, and we will look back to the problems that we had, welcome though they may be, about traffic and movement and mobility. So we need to sort these things. We've also got the climate emergency to deal with, and we have one of the biggest problems in Europe over urban air quality. It's ranging between pretty bad and bloody awful. So we've got to get to grips with emissions from diesel vehicles and so on. And the answer will not be the electric car, because all the electric cars are going to do is replace congestion in cities that cost billions with congestion in cities that cost billions, but is slightly cleaner. And there is the danger that some electric car drivers, I've been an electric car driver for 4.5 years now, they might get a bit smug and think, well, now I've got an electric car, it's 0 emissions, I'll drive more. Damn it, I will drive more than I used to because I'm cleaner now. Does that help with congestion? No, of course not. So rapid electrification of all urban public transport is certainly a key. We're doing that to a reasonable extent in London. There are a lot more electric buses now, but they are suffering the problem. Nobody's absolutely certain what the battery life will be, and the range is a continuing issue. You don't get the range that you would from diesel. Generation Z. it's interesting that if you go and talk to young people, which I do quite a lot, even though I'm very, very old, what they need is this. They all have one of these, and they do virtually everything with one of these. They have got apps to tell them when the bus is coming, if the bus operator has done the right thing and produced an app that works. Not all of them do. So they're not really interested in having things like cars. And I would say in less than 5 generations, maybe even only 3 generations, we will have grandchildren looking at their grandparents or great-grandparents and saying, did you really have cars? That's so funny. You know, why did you have cars? Oh, why didn't you use the tram? Seriously, that I think is going to happen. They're much, much, much more likely to travel collectively. Notice this? Much, much more likely than our generation and generations before. They are environmentally concerned in a good way, and they do understand that you need higher density housing for a whole variety of reasons. And the old idea of the boxes made out of ticky-tacky, all in a line, each with their own garden, that's going to die. They'll be in flats, they'll be in all kinds of high density accommodation, and they are much more willing to make sacrifices than our generation has been. Very quickly, A Tale of Two Cities. Interesting. I always use these two because most people have heard of them. Freiburg, very nice city, southern Germany, quite close to the Swiss border. Public transport modal split 31%, all day 31%. Car use 21%. York, similar population, 8% on public transport, declining. Yeah. Freiburg's 31 is already now 36 and still growing. York is probably down to 6 now, but that may be a post-COVID aberration. Car use 52%. If Freiburg can do it, why can't York? So the age-old question, can we afford a tram system? They seem to be inherently very expensive. Yeah. The drama in Edinburgh, where it cost practically £500 million to finish what should have been probably 120 million, is all politics. It was a complete basket case because the Scottish National Party, who got in charge of Edinburgh Council, wanted to scrap the whole thing. They basically shoved it all out to an arm's length business that had no idea what it was doing, blah, 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 blah. I went to give evidence on this subject to the Edinburgh Tram Inquiry, which is about to report. We may see what it says. So remember that the bitterness of poor quality is rarely exceeded by the sweetness of low price. I wish I could claim that as a Braddock original. If you go to the Treasury and say, I've got an idea, I'd like some money to build a tramway, they go, why don't you have buses? You know, but you get a bus for £250,000, but a tram will cost you 10 times that. Yes, but I don't want a bus because I've discovered that buses don't work. But what they never ever understand is whole life costs. If I buy my tram for €2.1 million, not only will it carry 300 people compared to a bus costing €300,000, taking say 70, but it will last for 45 years. The bus will struggle to last 15. But the biggest thing, to rephrase Bill Clinton, is the economy stupid. It's the drivers stupid. Why did we, and I was one of the architects of this, why did we introduce articulated buses in London on really busy routes like the 38 and the 25? Because we could save, instead of having 74 double-deckers to run the 38, we only needed 49 articulated buses. Basically, you're looking at, in London terms, 3 drivers for every bus, okay? 3 drivers for every bus. Do the maths. Along comes Boris. You've got to get rid of these things. They belong in Scandinavian airports, even though Scandinavian airports drive on the other side of the road, never mind. And they kill cyclists. Wrong, it's articulated trucks that kill cyclists. Not very many of them, but they did. No articulated bus in London ever killed a cyclist. But that's politics, so we got rid of them. And that's probably cost TfL about £114 million a year. It's the drivers, stupid. So don't be fazed by all this. Understand the whole life cost, and you'll go away and do it properly. There were concerns even in France about costs increasing per mile of track run, etc., etc. So the brave little city of Besançon went for a low-cost option. It didn't classically rebuild the whole streetscape from frontage to frontage, as many others have done. It went for smaller trams. Amusingly, they are now in the process of extending those trams because it's been such a success. More and more people are using, but luckily these things are modular. So you have a tram that's 19 meters long, you can extend it to 31, to 47, to whatever you want. The current world record is 56 meters long in Budapest. So you can get these things to more reasonable cost perspectives, which would be very important for the UK market. A favourite quote of mine, Hans Andreas Fristad, a good Norwegian from Oslo, said, "A city is not a city, Andrew, if it doesn't have a tramway." I like that. I like that. I think that's absolutely true. Remember also that only the steel wheel on steel rail tram can genuinely deliver you zero emission from source to passenger boarding, if you do it right. Obviously, you need renewables for your electricity supply, etc., etc. Any of the alternatives will have downsides, not just pollution from fossil fuels, even including hydrogen, but of course from tyre wear and brakes on the road surface. And they are the most dangerous particulates because they're the ones that get into the lungs and the brain and accelerate dementia. A modern tramway can achieve 90% of the benefits of a metro system at 10% of the costs. Wouldn't it be interesting? And I tried to get this to happen in TfL, but it failed. If instead of building Crossrail, we haven't seen the final bill yet, but I reckon it's going to be 23.5 billion. Yeah. A railway which was designed to carry people who now work at home, which has only 3 stops, effectively, between where it starts, New, Paddington, and where it ends, Liverpool Street. How much better a distributory effect would we have had with a tramway between Paddington and Liverpool Street? Okay, people would still change, but amusingly, almost everyone is still changing at Paddington because they've discovered if they want to use the Elizabeth line from, say, Reading, then they have to stop at every 3rd lamppost before they get to Paddington. Whereas if they get a fast train, they're in Paddington in 21 minutes. And then they change to the Elizabeth line. So they could have changed to a tram, and we would have carried a lot more people. I think we would have been able to get somewhere between 13 and 17 new tramways in London for that money. And London is interesting because it has some of the poorest boroughs in the land. Southwark, Camden, desperately need better public transport. But above all, what we kicked off with articulated buses would have been whole life cost terms cheaper still if we'd gone for trams. The 25, for example, would be running along Oxford Street as a tram, far better than whatever it is. They've reduced it a bit, but it's still something like 326 buses an hour in Oxford Street. Average occupancy 19, with all the pollution where it goes. And there are so many buses you can't actually cross Oxford Street anymore. It's a wall-to-wall red steel. Trams become an icon of the city, as already said. And then I would always argue an expensive tramway is actually more affordable than not having one. There we are. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button there. And above all, trams are best at removing. Thank you.
Questions from the room, that's thanks for that. Why do you think the UK has been so anti-tram? It's invested, it's put a lot of money into building rail, Northern Powerhouse. There's been a lot of money getting into infrastructure.
Yeah,
not one of them being a tram.
it's back to Grand Projet, isn't it? Things like the Victoria Line absolutely occupied London transport in the 1960s. The buses didn't get looking at all because we're building a new underground line, very important. Same again with Crossrail, aka line. I think we do things badly with public transport in Britain because all of our governments, certainly since the Second World War, whether Tory or Labour or for 5 short years coalition, want to believe that the user should pay most of the cost of any transport system. And yet, they have consistently, for more than 20 years now, failed to implement their promised fuel duty escalator. So motoring has got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And effectively, in the last 15 years, governments have subsidised private motoring, but they expect the user to pay the full cost of rail and bus services. And bonkers, absolutely bonkers. But that's what we've done. And the second thing we failed to do is look at the right models. In the 1960s, Barbara Castle was the first, I think she was the first female cabinet minister, but certainly the first female transport minister. Barbara Castle was sent by the British Civil Service to Boston, Massachusetts, because in Boston, they were creating a new transport authority, the MBTA, Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. Cut a long story short, that was the model in the UK for the late 1960s passenger transport authorities and executives. Merseyside, Manchester, Birmingham, Tyne and Wear were the original four.
Yeah.
They should have sent her to Hamburg. What was happening in Boston was that the Americans were struggling with what had happened nationwide. Privately owned transit companies were failing, and they had to create a new public body to run the system and brand it all as one. In Hamburg, in 1968, they introduced the first Verkehrsverbund, Traffic and Transport Partnership. It said, it really doesn't matter a stuff who runs the buses, the trams, the trains, the ferries, the hovercraft. Yeah, we want them all to be on one ticket. And it really doesn't matter what colour they are, private or publicly owned, but they've got to dance to our tune. We will decide, the authority will decide the timetables, the tariff, and you'll have one ticket to interchange everywhere. Whereas in Manchester is the classic example that this new body, Selneck, South East Lancashire, North East Cheshire, Passenger Transport Authority, brackets executive to operate it, effectively bundled all the separate, mainly municipal bus operations together into one big one, and they painted it a weird colour of orange. You know? And they were obsessed with the idea that you have this one body, Selneck, you know, nobody understood what it meant. But they were still completely disintegrated fares, and you needed different tickets for different parts of the city, different directions, using buses, etc. Remarkably poor understanding. You've got to get the simplicity in there. If it isn't as simple as the key you use to drive your car, you won't get people out of that car. The best way to get people out of that car is offering them something which is demonstrably better than their car, like a tram. Go to Nottingham. I love going to Nottingham and standing in groups of people on trams saying, what did you do before the tram? Well, I drove. But you never use the bus. Calm down, use the bus. Get stuck in the traffic, waste of space. You know. Besides which, I had to have 5 different tickets to get back to Beeston after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Trams, wonderful.
Do you think with more mayors and devolution, like the Ford Round report, but just
yes,
in general, that seems to be
yes, but only if they're given revenue raising powers. What we've got at the moment is this series of slightly mysterious city deals kicked off by George Osborne. So if you became a mayor, say in Bristol, yeah, you would go and see George and have all sorts of interesting discussions, and he would, behind closed doors, no public involvement, sign you up for a city deal. So you've got city deal money. No, we've got to raise the money in the cities. The Versement Transport is virtually the perfect example. We have to do that. And be brave, because once you've done it, businesses will actually support it. Yeah. And they will be willing to see it increase because it's going to give them what they want. Yeah.
Right. That's good. So
on mute on there. Right. Quentin, can you hear us? Do you want to raise?
Yes, I can. It's just a comment, really. I endorse everything that Andrew has just said in his paper. It's fascinating, the examples he gave. But I mean, I often go into Europe and almost just to look at the trams, actually. But I mean, a good example is Linz in Austria, where the main shopping street has a tram line running right through it. And it's just so civilized. You know, the cityscape is attractive, and it's just, as I say, it's just so civilized. And the idea of a 24-hour ticket, which covers all modes, I suppose a near example is Brussels. It's not an isolated example, but you know, it makes life so easy, and you just jump off when you want and jump back on again. It's just wonderful, and we could do with more of it in Britain. That's my comment.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you can get a 24-hour ticket in London, but you will pay a lot of money for it because it includes the underground. If you avoid the underground, because underground fares are roughly double bus fares for a variety of long forgotten historical reasons, you can travel around on just a one-day bus pass and buy one for 7 days a week, and it will be cheaper than all the TfL offers of an integrated ticket. The moment you include the underground, you pay more. Linz is a fabulous example of an excellent public transport. They also have the good sense to keep their trolley buses, and in fact they're now buying more and more trolley buses, because what they've discovered is that if they have the modern version with IMC, in motion charging, then every bus in the city with a pair of poles on its roof is charging its batteries while running under the wires. Yeah, we're about to have started one, and about to start a second London experiment with so-called opportunity charging. So at the end of Route 358, a snazzy looking bus built to look like a tram will connect to a pantograph arrangement and charge its batteries in the 7-minute layover time it hasn't got, because the traffic means it's already 11 minutes late, but never mind.
Just locally.
Yeah, but the difficulty with that sort of system is that it fries the batteries. Yeah, it is literally shoving something like 400 kWh it may only be seconds, leave alone minutes, and that will fry the batteries over time. It certainly imbalances the batteries, and if you know anything about batteries, they're friendly things. They like to be balanced, they don't like to be imbalanced. Whereas what Linz is doing is having every bus with a set of trolley poles, and then when they're going off to sections of the city that have no wires, they've got their batteries charged perfectly, evenly, they're balanced, and they come back and they do the whole thing again out to the other side. We need to learn from that.
What do you think about the free public transport in Luxembourg?
Yes, wonderful. There's always a set of interesting arguments about should public transport be free, and one of the best people to argue it with was good old Dave Wetzel.
Yes.
Remember Dave Wetzel, Livingston's #2, and he was mayor. I love Dave because he was a great character to talk to. He is absolutely vehemently addicted to having fares-free public transport. Now, yes, you save all the costs of having staff, processing money, all sorts of stuff, but you lose lots and lots of things like, what if, because it's free, you get huge imbalances in numbers of people travelling in certain areas, and they might not do that if they were paying a fare. It's 6 of one and a half dozen of the other. I think the Luxembourg experiment is really interesting. It's not the only one, of course. Tallinn did it before Luxembourg. They made their public transport free. They fell foul of the EU because they wanted to make it for Estonian residents only, and the EU said, no, you can't do that. So in Luxembourg, as you know, you can go there. And not everybody knows this, but virtually all across Europe, certainly all the former communist countries, if you carry your passport showing you're sometimes over 60, mostly over 70, you can travel by rail for free. You do not need, and in many cities, local public transport. Yeah. Now, admittedly, some of the places you would do that, like Katowice in Poland, a massive industrial and coalfield area, reinventing itself. It's a gorgeous place to go to, but it's not exactly high on tourists. But you can, with your passport, travel free on their buses and trams.
Know that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any more questions in the room? Not. I'll.
Can I have one quick?
Yeah, you can have one more.
Do you think it will change? Like, what's your on the optimism scale? Where is it pointing?
Things in Britain will only change because they have to change. We are skirting around the edges of what we have to do to meet the 2030/2050 net zero challenges in transport terms. I think we will do the things that the French and other countries have done, and maybe even what Luxembourg has done, simply because we'll have to. If we're honest, we already know that we cannot sustain private car use in urban areas. Rural areas, it's a different kettle of fish. There's no hope of providing any kind of viable rural public transport network. Beaching closed the railways, bus services are in relatively terminal decline in the shires, let's say, in the rural areas. So I think we're going to have to live with cars continuing to be used in the country. If people want to live there, they'll have to pay a premium for having the luxury of a car. Certainly if they drive it into a city. In fact, they probably won't be allowed to drive it into the city. They'll go to a park and ride and get on the tram, because that's what the tram's been put there for. But we don't have a mechanism for meeting all the challenges of the climate emergency, which our grandchildren especially are not going to forgive us for if we don't actually get this right. We've got to learn to live in cities without cars. Now, the good news is there are millions of people, literally, in the world who do this already. Take Switzerland. In Zurich, car ownership has been declining for the last 25 years. Car use has more than halved in the last 15 years. Because the public transport system is so good, you set your watch by it. You know, I took a bunch of London people to Basel once, and they were fascinated to know what kind of complaints the transport company got. And they had to go and find somebody who knew about complaints, you see. So Klaus is sitting in front of us, and the boss man of Basel Tramway says, "Now, Klaus, when did we last have a complaint?" Klaus says, "Oh, it was, I think it was 3 months ago." Okay, what was the complaint about? Was it a late bus or a tram? No. He says to Ulrich, his boss, "Don't you remember, it was that woman in the Rengasse. She was very upset because we changed the tram timetable, and she used the noise of the first tram in the morning to make her husband's breakfast, and we made it 7 minutes later, and her husband's whole day was late." So we said, wasn't actually a complaint about the running of the system then. No, we don't get those, because we make it work. Yeah, you don't need cars in cities. Even London, there is certainly declining car ownership. Much greater use of things like car clubs, zip car, and all this stuff. Yeah, and people no longer bothering to have a car. But you need a 24/7 public transport system that they can rely on. London is a long way from perfect, but it's the basics are there. One ticket, etc.
Mike, can I just respond to that? Andrew, I live in South Essex. I live in a place called Wickford, which is on the north edge of the sort of Basildon conurbation. The traffic levels are horrendous.
Yeah.
Travel times are unpredictable because of traffic. I can't imagine what the pollution is like.
Yep.
So I can understand how in the future cities can hopefully in the UK somehow move towards having less car usage, but how that is achieved in suburban areas where there is very high traffic usage, but a more dispersed population. I don't understand how we might achieve that, but as far as it's got to be done, because we cannot carry on like this. It's utter madness. The way people live their lives in this corner of the country is bonkers. My daughter lives on the other side of the river. She lives in Kent, and we occasionally drive over or under the Dartmoor crossing in peak hour, and the traffic coming over that bridge is just.
It's a very interesting case in point. There's I don't know if you've read about it. There's a proposal called Kennex, Kent and North East Essex. No, not Kennex. Anyway, whatever it is, the idea is to build a tram line in a tunnel under the river, effectively between Thurrock and Gravesend. And over time extend it to meet the Elizabeth line at Abbey Wood, to go to Maidstone, to go to Basildon, all these things. So you create a kind of interurban tramway network. A very good example of this.
Humberside.
Sorry?
Humberside.
Yeah, a very good example of this, if you know the Rhineland-Pfalz area of Germany, there is a set of cities, Ludwigshafen, very industrial, Mannheim, very commercial, Heidelberg, very university. Yeah. Mannheim, Ludwigshafen, Heidelberg are almost one city now. Development of new housing especially has been deliberately targeted where the tram lines are, and they have a big regional tram network as well as local networks within the cities, and it all interlocks together. And that the scale of that is not dissimilar to what Kennex is proposing, so you go Gravesend across the river. The staggering thing about the Dartford crossing is that about 35% of the car traffic on there daily is local.
Yeah.
It's local. I was involved in a tramway project for South Hampshire, which would have tunnelled under Portsmouth Harbour to take people from the Gosport Fareham Peninsula through to Portsea Island. And that is one of the biggest car movements in the country. And it completely knackers the M27, of course, because people are just commuting. Yeah, why are you commuting? I want to use the motorway. Leave it alone. So we would have taken millions of car journeys a year off that. But the scheme was scuppered because Alistair Darling, the then Transport Secretary, decided he didn't like trams and pulled all the funding and the plug on the whole thing. Bonkers. But I think that's what you will see happen, that you will see these sort of regional hub and spoke type systems. Very interesting, the discussion of a new combined authority for Nottinghamshire, therefore including Nottingham City, Derbyshire, therefore including Derby. I would argue it ought to include Leicester as well as the third big town in the East Midlands region. And one day it will. Again, they are Ludwigshafen, Mannheim and Heidelberg. So over time you build a regional tram network that does all kinds of things. It has longer distance runs to take people on the kind of journeys you make from the Basildons of this world, and also sorts them locally, university to shops and so on, home to work. We should be doing that. We can do that. Are we the fifth richest nation in the world, but fast declining? Yeah, and it's something that we are. Do you know the most successful economic sanctions anywhere in the world? You'd think it would be against Putin because of Ukraine. Actually, no, it's not. It's the United Kingdom that imposed sanctions on itself by leaving the EU. Yeah, we're completely mad. We're completely mad.
Andrew's right in what he says.
Oh, right. Don't go there, don't go there.
It's completely anyway, let's not go there because it gets argumentative.
Yeah.
The simple thing is that if we spend our money wisely, we can do these things, but we have to be brave in terms of letting go the purse strings from the Treasury. It's no good having HM Treasury control every last penny anywhere in the country. Got to get rid of the Barnett formula. Anybody understand the Barnett formula?
No.
That supposedly means that if you give £1 to Scotland, you have to give £1.09 to Wales, and 94 and a half pence to Northern Ireland, etc. It's some arcane system that governs the way things are funded in the UK. Why are we doing that? Why aren't we doing it at local level? Why don't we have the Vestmont Transport?
Follow on Paul to give
Okay.
but thanks.
Where do I stand? I need to stand sort of here.
Stay and talk at the.
Can see, but well, I hope you thought that that was interesting for Andrew to respond to my plea to step in. I have had the pleasure of having some meetings with Andrew before, and actually, Andrew, we did work very briefly together on Docklands Light Railway in the 1880s. No, 1980s. So,
I remember it.
And it's only when I saw Andrew recently give a similar talk to this transport lobby business that I've been a member of recently, that I thought it would be of great interest to the wider audience in our engineering fraternity. So I hope you enjoyed that and promoted discussion. I think there's opportunity for Andrew to sort of support other PWI events if you found that really interesting. We are light on numbers today, Andrew, which is a shame. Circumstances pushed at us to postpone this, but really grateful for you making the big efforts coming here, changing the days with the rail strikes, all this business about shooting ourselves in the foot as a country. I think we've achieved something today, and thank you very much. Thank you for answering the questions and giving us your usual enthusiasm. So I'd ask everybody, oh, and thanks for some of the memories. Now I know why I got a lot of abuse when I had a red car. And thanks to the memory of Nantes, which I had the pleasure of visiting before, when I was on the DLO and we were planning a manual driven tram for Docklands. Thank you so much again. And if you'd like to join us, and we look forward to...
And also, neither Mike nor I were disagreeing with Andrew.
No,
we agree with him.
We should have stayed.
Yes.
Well, I think there's a lot of support for your views, but that's another debate about in, out, and shaking all about. So thanks very much, and I think there's opportunities there for sort of future conferences and things, if that was a popular subject. Sustainable travel and development for PWI is key. So if you'd all join me in the usual way, and we look forward to you join us perhaps for a quick one after.